Hi, today we'll be going over data types in Python. Well, what is a data type? Let's start with the scenario, right? Start simple. We have a box, and whatever we give the box, it becomes that. It's a cloner. You give it the number 10, it becomes the number 10. We give it the number 5.5, it becomes 5.5. We give it the word, like the sentence, I am Iron Man, it becomes Iron Man. I am Iron Man. Well, those are all data, right? The 10, the 5.5, and I am Iron Man sentence. They're all different types of data, right? There's a whole number, there's a number with a decimal, there's words. Those are all different types of data. Different types of data, data types. Types of data, data types. Well, it's in the name, right? And today we'll be going over the four most commonly used data types in Python. Well, what are they? Integers, strings, floats, and booleans. These are also widely used within other languages too. So if you learn them here, you learn them from mostly every other language there is. Well, let's start simple. What is an integer? Integers are basically whole numbers. Whole numbers. And examples of them are 5, 10, 100, 2,000, 310. Those are all example of integers. But integers can also be negative whole numbers. So it's negative 5, negative 10, negative 102,310. Those are all whole numbers, right? Let's move on to strings. So what is a string? So a string is essentially words, characters, numbers, anything that is surrounded by two things, right? It could either be surrounded by these double quotes or it could be surrounded by single quotes. And what's cool about this is you can legit have anything you want in there, right? So for example, I could have hi. I can also do the same thing with single quotes. I could write hi. And those two are the same thing. This is surrounded by different things. It's completely fine. But remember, if you start with a double quote, you need to end with a double quote. If you start with a single quote, you need to end with a single quote. That's one of the main rules of strings. So you can have sentences, right? You can have I like to move it. Move it. That's a string. Another string would be Pokemon, but replacing anything that looks like a number with the number, right? That's a string. You could have, if it's surrounded by double quotes, it's or single quotes, it's a string, right? So you could have 10 inside of there. You could also have the number -5 inside of there, but it's a string right now. It's not a number, it's a string. So yeah, those are examples of strings. Let's move on to floats, and then we'll go to booleans, and then we'll come back to strings and all these. So what is a float? So we've had numbers, whole numbers, right? But what are numbers with decimals? Well, those are floats. So decimal numbers. So any number with a decimal, that's a float. So some examples of floats are, for example, 23.325, um, or 3.14, a very well-known number. It can also be something like 34.11 1124. Those are all floats. But you could also have negative floats too as an integer, right? So you can have negative 23.325 and all that stuff. But what is also cool about floats is that you can have whole numbers and convert those into floats. So basically a 5, and if you want to make that a float, it turns into a 5.0. It just adds a decimal to it. So now integers can also be considered to floats. And yeah, so let's move on to booleans. So what is a boolean? Well, you might have heard. You might think that computers are made in zeros and ones, and that's true to a point. Booleans are representations of those, right? So booleans have two values. It can be either true or it could either be a false, right? And most of the time, trues are represented by ones and falses are represented by zeros. So that's a boolean. So it's either a true or a false. Simple enough? Yeah. So I'm gonna introduce you to some functions in Python which can actually help you a bit with this. Not really that high scientific, not really that mind blowing, but whatever is helpful is helpful, right? So there's a function called type in Python, right? And if you run it, it says type. If you run it as a function, functions are basically anything that you give it a value or you run and it does something for you in the background. So here's a function called type. It takes in either 1 or 3 arguments. So let's create a variable, right? If you know what a variable is, great. If you don't, well, remember the box example where whatever we gave it the value to it, hey, the box was the variable, right? We say, hey, box, you're equal to 1. Hey, box, you're equal to 10. The box, whenever we want the box, we get the number 10 from it. So we have a variable called box, right? And we give it the value 10. So we now have a variable called box, which has the number 10 in it. And so let's say that, and let's run type with the box, the variable in it. And it's an integer. We can also run type with 10 in it, right? It gives us the same thing, it's an integer. Well, how about we run type with 10.11, right? It gives it a float. But what if we run 10.0, right? I did give you an example here. For floats, I did say any number, any whole number with a .o in it is going to be a float. Let's see if that's true. It is a float, right? If we give it value of true, it's a bool. Bool is short for boolean. And if we give it, for example, I like to move it, right? I like to move it. And if we paste that in there, boom, it's a string. str is short for string. What if we give it the number 10 inside of a quote? Well, it gives you number 10. Alright, it tells you it's a string since it's surrounded by quotes. So that's great, right? It tells us, hey, these are actually true. What I taught you today was true. Integers are whole numbers, and it's proven by this type function. It's an integer, and yeah. So thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.